So, I want to talk a little bit about the new book, For You and Only You. And to begin with, can we start with your kind of 1 minute elevator pitch to give people a sense as to what this book is about?
This for me, like, I'm not good at this either, but this for me is Joe in his most vulnerable state ever because he wrote a book and he loves someone who wrote a book. So it's all possible, and the stakes are very high, especially for someone like him in his head. And they are the two outsiders in this Harvard fellowship. And if people get in the way of them, he is going to stop them because the only way this ends is with Joe and Wonder being great American novelists.
Yeah, yeah. And then, as is typical of Joe, don't get in the way of his mission and his ideas. It ain't gonna end well.
Because my favorite, I feel like the bat, not that like the elevator pitch is hard because I just think of like moments or aspects of it, but I love that
Mm,
part when he's waiting for two different women to read his book, and
yeah.
I just that for me was like joy to write and to think of him
Mm,
in that state. Like it's hard for anyone. We all know the feeling of hitting send, but if you're Joe Goldberg and you've
yeah.
exposed yourself, which is also so un him to do, that's where like
Mm,
there's such a difference between writing and being published. It was just really fun to like give him kind of a job, like a career that
mm,
he is so not suited for. Like
yeah.
he wants to be JD Salinger, but he doesn't want to let anyone even maybe have the opportunity to tell him that maybe he is not.
Right.
And I like that
Yeah.
from
Yeah. Well, I mean, everything about Joe Goldberg historically is about control and being in control of the situation, which, as we know, as writers, as soon as we send it out, we are not anymore. So, I
him.
mean, yeah.
And I thought, yeah, like that's so when I was playing with it, it was like, oh my God, like the poor tragedy if he did this, if he wrote a novel and believed in it and he would, with his imagination and his like, ego, he would feel like this is it. And if he gets that validation, if he manipulates another guy to give him validation that he's right, oh no, like they're all gonna die. like, like because now anyone who doesn't agree, or even the idea of someone having the opportunity to contradict that, to not love it, like I just loved like putting him in the position where where of course he has to rationalize his way out of it and fight that from happening, but also the tragedy of like then it's another dream down the tubes. But that's what he likes. He
Mm,
likes things being everything not working out. And that's what was fun of like thinking, like getting to think of those stories, yeah, of like Goodwill Hunting, of like when certain
mm,
people who get that invitation into that world thrive in it and they come out, and it's like Joe is someone who would be very well aware of those stories and that pressure and not be able to, like, he doesn't like to be vulnerable.
yeah. And Goodwill Hunting is referenced so much, both directly and indirectly. I think it has to be the most referenced movie or text within this book.
Yes, I feel like, yeah, it's either that or Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, but
Oh, yes,
probably
yeah, yeah,
yes, yeah.
yeah. Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, particularly if we combine it with just general references to Roald Dahl, is a close second.
Yes. And yeah,
But
the Goodwill Hunting felt right because I did love that, like, he's also to me like the part of us that has seen those movies and has ingested all that romance and does feel like, where's my happy ending? Where's like when,
mm,
and also the way the romance of the friendship in there when Ben Affleck
mm,
makes that speech where he's like, the what the best part of my day is when I'm walking up here and I think you might not be here. Like I
yeah,
cry inside just thinking about that. And I feel like someone like Joe, like watching things and always assuming that he's kind of the hero, like
mm,
kind of and that's what makes him a little bit of a naive child too, that like he thinks that those things are how life works to a degree, and then
mm.
he goes to such cynicism. And And without giving things away, I liked it was fun with those to see him kind of look at them differently at the end of the book and
Yeah.
kind of why they're attractive to us as like fantasies, as stories, and how not so realistic, not so easy to kind of make that dream come true in real life.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, with this, as with a lot of books, which is always the challenge of doing this podcast, it's always difficult to be like, well, how many specifics do we actually talk about? Because, I mean, even about, I guess, maybe about 30% into the book, there is a very significant reveal that I'd love to talk about, but then, I want the people listening to experience this for themselves.
These are where like book events are so fascinating to me because you go, it's when the book, like, sure, some people have gotten advanced copies and read it, but there
Yeah.
are people who haven't read it yet. You don't want to spoil things for them because
Mm.
everything when we were talking about wanting to go in somewhat blind to things, I just find it
Yeah.
funny. I'm like, all that a month after the book was out, it would just make more sense because you're not like risking like the nerves that go for me, like I get tongue tied just because I'm trying to monitor and be aware of that. And yeah, like I remember I did an event with Andy Bartz that I was so nervous about because her book had so many twists. And I'm
Mm.
like, oh, like we're both trying to like have this conversation that was so stilted because not wanting to give it away. And
Yeah.
mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, one thing I love with your books is the way that you name characters and locations. It's always so on point. And I mean, obviously, the main love interest here is Wanda. We previously had love as the main interest. And I mean, Glenn Shoddy, his name is perfect, but it will only become known as to why that is such an apropos name a little later into the book, which I can't reveal. And then, of course, Joe Goldberg's book had to be entitled Me. There was almost an inevitability about that because, this is you, but everything is really about him. It is me, me, me.
Absolutely. Yes. And I loved him not having the self-awareness about that title. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Of like that he could call the fucking book Me and still not get it. Like that is where I
Yeah.
do love him. I love that blind spot about himself like so much. I think that that's also can be relatable. Like we all have our blind spots,
Mm.
but the name of his book is just that made me happy.
Yeah.
As if like yeah,
Yeah.
and his very what about me? Like he that short end of the stick syndrome. And yeah, with
Mm.
names, I look at those scary moments when I have the name in my head and it comes out of nowhere or there's been a one
Mm.
that I didn't like, and I think it but then I there's that moment where I Google like surname with the name like can it be? And with Shoddy,
Yeah.
I feel like I feel like that was a real surname when I looked into it.
Mm.
But I but it might not. I'm pretty sure. But there have been times when I've tried and like it's like, no, this is not a surname, and I'm like, well, it's fiction. Well, yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
it's that's the debate. But in these books where it's so like, I feel like I made that commitment in the first one to having it take place in the real world by tying it to
Mm.
like Lou Reed's death. That when I was writing this one, it was like we're in that pandemic space. I was in this like, oh fuck, like I don't have the option of writing a book where we don't acknowledge the pandemic. But at the same time, I this none of it's been through none of our filters, and I didn't really feel necessarily ready to write about it. So it was like, okay, if I push time forward a little and I get to think about what
Mm.
Joe did with his pandemic, and it did feel like, yeah, he would kidnap someone and write a book. Like that sounds about right. Like,
Yeah.
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 And convince him he saved a whole city from a, like toxic person. Like it's
Right.
like, okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, was there reluctance incorporating these COVID references, knowing that just the way that timelines work in publishing, that this would be out like a year or possibly more later, at which point things would have progressed or altered, and you didn't know how that would have changed.
Yes, very scary. And in that way, my first draft was all Zoom. And it was also
Mm,
me, like, I feel like now when I look back, I was very much like coping with all of the changes and
mm,
all the solitude in my life, where like the first draft of the book, the whole workshop that they have met on Zoom. And
mm,
it was all, there was a lot of social distancing. There were a lot of like Joe and Wonder, like, at a distance, like everything had a lot of distance in it. And then a few months later, after I sent it in, I was in that high space where I was like, actually, this first draft is it. And then as that fever went
yeah.
down, time passed, and when I opened it, it was like, yeah, my editor is right. Like, it is dated. If something feels already dated then and kind of too time stamped, I feel like that's such a delicate dance, and it's fun to me right now
Mm,
to read books and see what everyone did with it. And so I wanted to have a balanced feeling of like it takes place in this world, but also like I wanted to be in a place where it was a little mellower, where some people
mm,
are still a part of the conversation, but it's not kind of where we are now, where it's like
mm,
you're everyone. Some people, for many reasons, are wearing masks when they're indoors. Some people aren't. The way it's like it's at such an individual level now, but there's toilet
mm,
paper. So that, yeah, I feel like a big part of that first book was all that early stuff of the grocery market and I'm like,
mm,
maybe I'll go back to that first draft and repurpose it as something else because it does feel like a timestamp. Like I like a lot of it, but I didn't feel ready to like fully be able to write about that, like in
yeah.
it.
Yeah, it's been interesting to see different writers and creatives' approach to whether to or not to incorporate the pandemic into their fiction. And I mean, I can definitely see why there's a lot of reluctance to kind of write full on pandemic stories that are particularly dealing with COVID, particularly because, I mean, even now, do we have the full picture? I don't know. Maybe that it's like
That's why it's also
it's
scary.
yeah,
Because to imagine a pandemic world when we've also learned so much that like it comes back, it's the zombie. You know what I mean? That
yeah,
like I know that right now there's a new strain somewhere. I can't think of the name of it, but it feels like once you've been through that, you understand that it can happen, and so
mm,
our our outlook is altered. So that's where I'm
yeah,
like, in order to find a comfort zone for this book where I knew it had to be acknowledged as part of it, but I'm like, I want to find a way to do it where I still feel like this is possible. It
mm,
feels a little real. But what was funny was that I did go to Boston like after I feel like when I was like halfway through the second draft, and I was like, yeah, I'm gonna roam around Harvard a little bit, and I get there and
mm,
I completely like in that state of denial and being so excited to like go somewhere. I get there, there's no students, like nothing's on campus.
yeah,
It was that point, and I'm like, oh my god, like that
yeah,
was a comical trip. Yeah, but it was still good to like be around the area and yeah, go to some of the spots and yes.
yeah. Well, I mean, it was probably good fuel for if you ever have an apocalyptic story set within Harvard, because you got to see it with no kind of action, no people.
Yes, yeah, just yeah, for it to be a ghost town. Like I just was there a couple weeks ago with my friend had a reading and we're walking around. I'm like, oh, this is it. Like this is,
Yeah,
like all the liveliness and all the students and the activity. And it was like, all right, like, yeah. And I hope
yeah,
that it feels that way, in the book. Yeah, it was but yes, these pandemic books are interesting.
yeah.
It's like a
It
giant
was interesting.
experiment.
Yeah, yeah. It was interesting to see how the film The Glass Onion dealt with the pandemic, in the sense that, I mean, have you seen the film?
Haven't, but go on. The one that I saw was a horror movie that I can't think of the name of, but I think it was Kevin Williamson, and it was really good. I was impressed
Mm,
that like I felt like this was a well done story, and it's like, yeah,
yeah.
he's good at this. Yeah,
Yeah, I was just gonna say, with the Glass Onion, they acknowledged it in the sense that everyone kind of turned up to this like meeting, to this party that they'd been invited to, in a mask, but then there happened to be a thing that they were, I can't remember, were they sprayed or were they injected with it, and it's like, okay, Now you're good. So then they could take their mask off, and I thought
Oh,
that
wow.
was quite an interesting thing to
So
do.
there was
You've acknowledged. What was
yes, so
that?
wait, there was in their world there was like a magic shot that, you know, made you immune to it?
Yeah, so it's like we've
Got it.
acknowledged that it exists for the first 10 minutes. Now we're doing this thing so that you don't have to worry about it for the rest of the film.
That's
Um,
a wonderful thing.
yeah. Yeah. I mean,
Reminded me of like
I'll be, yeah. At the moment in my fiction, I haven't acknowledged it yet. I mean, because, like, I don't know. I don't want it to be gimmicky, or I don't want it to be kind of gratuitous. And, like, I think a lot of the stories that I'm writing about at the moment, I mean, they could either be taking place in kind of pre-pandemic 2019 is conceivable, or it could be kind of 2023 where a lot of it is now invisible.
yes. Yeah, and then I feel like it comes down to the inner workings of the story and the characters, right? Like it's not surprising to me that the thing I've been writing, it didn't even occur to me. Like it takes place in normal
Mm,
modern times. Like you said, it's almost like, okay, this is 2019, but also it's
yeah,
not like I like whatever the nuts and bolts of the story are, like they just don't involve it for some, you know, and the
yeah,
character is not contending with that. Yeah, whereas I feel like some things, if you're going to do that, it's part of the reason you're going to be motivated to do that story is because you have something you want to explore with it. So,
yeah, yeah.
yes.
And I mean, with For You and Only You, this is the book in terms of subject matter that I guess is closest connected to what you actually do, as a writer. So, was there reluctance, or what concerns did you have with that in mind, knowing that, to a point, you are satirizing and giving sharp social commentary on a world that you are a part of, and submitting
Yeah,
it to people who are also part of that world?
right. Yeah, it was very surreal. And part of it too, especially at that moment, like for me, right when the pandemic started, you know how it is like you when you write, you kind of you lock down and then you go do things. Like I had a trip
Mm,
planned. I was supposed to do an event in Baltimore. I was so excited to go to New Orleans into the like a parish outside of the city and the bayou. And it all got canceled. And you know, we were all in that state. And I had this like anger and real strong awareness of how much I love those events. And I love those times of like seeing other writers, of doing something where like the work of the day is talking, interacting, not necessarily writing, you know, and I like those breaks from the extreme of like the writing. And I feel like I drew on that of like obsessing over like being around people. And then in the Joe way, it felt like there was no way to not bring him in touch with writers because it was part like
mm,
someone who loves books. Like this was time for him to like for someone who has books on a pedestal, writing on a pedestal, puts women on a pedestal. It's like, well, no, writers are humans too. And
mm,
I felt like with each character, I was like, I enjoyed playing with his impatience, disgust, and judgment because for all these people, they all put themselves out there. And that's the
mm,
difference. So it's like they all have their moods, their reactions, the way anyone who lives an honest, like exposing themselves kind of life. Like with Lou, it killed me the way when he's in that postpartum release moment, and there's a
mm,
moment in the class when she has them finger painting, and he makes the cover
mm,
of his book and puts it on Instagram, and Joe is so disgusted. And it's like, fuck you, Joe. You don't know what it's like to put a book out. You don't know what it's like to
mm,
like go through any of that. And I loved that's where I loved Joe like being forced to like it's so easy to love a dead writer, right? Like that was part of the Roald
mm,
Dahl thing. And you can feel like, oh,
mm.
that person I would have Joe's very would have, could have, should have, you know, and he's like, that guy's
Yeah.
an asshole, but he respected me, I would have gotten along with him. But what always
Mm,
happens with Joe is that he gets near these living humans and it's like, well, none of them are good enough. So I
mm,
liked how hard he was on them and the way in that way, like, and without giving things away, it was like, in what world could Joe ever do what any of them have done, which is to share his work and allow himself to be like liked and disliked and assessed and
mm.
yeah. the headache of writing that book, of carrying all those writers and all those books, their books in my head, and going through these like like when you wake up in the morning and I'd be like, oh my god, like what, like Sarah Beth Swallows isn't real, like none of those books exist, like,
Mm.
and I'd start thinking about them or what they would be like. I felt like I was writing everyone in that fellowship's books in my head, and then getting like heartbroken that they were all made up, pretend, didn't
Mm.
exist. Yes. So it was, this writing experience was very, very bizarre. Yeah. Like even for the U books, like, yes. Like
Yeah.
I always,
W-
do you go through this where you think the characters are real, you're spending a lot of time with them, and the heartbreak of when you're done and they're not? Like this book, I wouldn't stop writing it. Like my editor's like, it's over. Like, you can't,
yeah.
I'm like, she's like, also, come on, we edited this, the word flow is there, like you're, and I'm like, well, I just don't want to stop. Like I don't know what I'm gonna do without them. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, how long does it typically take you to go from, writing, I guess, that initial plan to then essentially being forced by your editor to be like, we're done. We are done. Give it
Yes,
to
that
me. Stop
yeah.
writing.
I'm like, okay, so it's 2023. I feel like that conversation was this summer. I don't
Mm.
know if it was, I think maybe August or September, because I can remember sitting
Yeah.
outside and doing all this rewriting. And in the back of my head, knowing bad girl, like not allowed, but like
Mm.
couldn't stop. And so that was 2023 summer. And I feel like this book, I feel like I started in that first draft in 2020, I think,
Mm.
or before that, maybe before, but a long time. Like, because the 2020 draft, at first I was going to write about him in Florida, and then right away I was like,
Mm.
no, like I need, like I could do, if it was a novella, I could put him in that bar and keep him there, but for a book
Mm.
I want him to have like a new environment, a new like real challenge of being in a new role that would be bring new problems, and people that he can be jealous of. I think that's my favorite thing
Yeah.
with him, that like the way he can't acknowledge or deal with his jealousy, and he just brings it into I'm better than you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
and then
so,
that.
mm,
So yeah,
yes.
2.5. Yeah, right? Math. 1
Yeah.
year?
Yeah. Well, I mean, sounds like 2.5 years if you started in 2020 or potentially a little before and then finished in
Yeah.
summer 2022.
Yes. And with those breaks in there where you're finishing that draft, walking away from it for a little while, that kind of thing,
Mm.
waiting. But do you like those questions always feel like weird, because with everything, do you find this with everything you write, that it feels like, oh, I started this a long time ago? Like that everything was kind of like somewhere and there it's coming, and then when you get into the emotions and the care, like all of it always feels like I'm just filtering ideas I've had through a lot of life. And I think that's, for this book, that's what was fun too, of feeling like I wish I wrote all of their books. And I think it's part of the
Yeah.
heartbreak, the way you can never read all the books in the world, and you certainly can never write all the stories you want to
Mm.
tell. And this was a way, especially in that pandemic, being nice to myself way of like, well, if I make up all these writers and all their different types of books, I can kind of feel like I wrote them all. Like,
Yeah.
but yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Yes. Do you
I mean,
know
would
when you
oh,
have that starting moment with a book? Do you have a vivid memory of that with most things that you write, that like, oh, the day that it like clicked, that you would consider it the start day?
oh, sometimes I think the start day and the day that it clicked might be different days depending on you know
Very
the
different days.
project, as it were. But I mean, I certainly agree that a lot of books seem to take a long time, even if it's like only with retrospect you realize that the writing started way before you committed a single word to that piece of paper. And I mean, that there's a few books and ideas as well that I've had kind of marinating for absolutely years, and I've made some false starts on them, or it's like I have a concept, I've begun them numerous times, but I haven't quite found what is the real entry point, what is the real mode to tell this story. And, one day I will. Like, there's one that I'm specifically thinking about as I'm saying this, and it must be about a decade now, and there's been like two or three iterations of it. And yeah, sometimes you end up cannibalizing different ideas, and it's like, okay, well, we'll take this element from this false start, we'll take this element from another, but it's just, yeah, it's
Yes.
finding the right mode. And I think I think on that basis, or certainly along those lines, like any story that I've ever written, if I were to have written it at a different time, or if I were to start it now, it would be a different book. I mean, it's kind of like that quote about you can never step into the same river twice. It's like any time you
Yes,
go to write the story, it would be different.
absolutely. And so many of these are like, now I think of like my creepy crawling night thoughts. Like at night, I feel like
Yeah.
it happened during the pandemic pretty much. I was always a night person for writing. And over the pandemic, I became a morning person because at night I would just get into that neurotic, like, I'm gonna die, I'm never gonna write this, I'm never gonna write that, I'm never gonna write that, like, and then you wake up in the morning and you're like, right, you never step into the same river twice, like what is meant to be will
Yeah.
be and all that. Like I feel like I have two different brains, and that morning one is so
Mm.
well adjusted and productive, and that night one is fucking demented, like, and
Yeah.
just negative.
Yeah. But having those two different modes as well, it feels like whilst there's probably going to be a mode that is better for writing in general, probably the morning one, it's not a bad idea to be like, we're going to let this kind of demented, nightmarish brain at least take a pass on on one of the drafts. Let's just see what happens.
Yes, I feel like you have to do that too. And I like that feeling when at night when it's like, all right, well, like, for me, it's like if I'm watching a TV show and I realize I
Mm,
just missed 10 minutes, I'm like, okay,
yeah.
you win, brain. We're great. Like, it's that, like, when I realize, oh, I'm not able to absorb an intake because it's got to get out of my system. Like,
Yeah.
I like that feeling. That's where, like, in the morning, I just feel more well adjusted in the morning or more like optimistic, more like a Disney character, like, oh, everything is,
Right.
look at the birds and the possibility. And yeah. And I think that
Yeah.
definitely happened in the pandemic because I was so thinking of night always as like fun, whether you're out
Mm,
or alone at night. It's when it's your choice. It was all about choice. Like I love to go out at
mm,
night. I love to choose to stay home at night. And when that element of choice was gone, man, that was the thing. As a
yeah.
controlling person, I was like, this blows. Like, because it's so fun to choose to stay home and write at night. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And I wonder when you're writing in the morning, do you check social media beforehand? Do you check your phone? Do you check the news? Is that a thing you do before the writing?
It's like sometimes I do. The one thing,
Mm,
like, I won't open text necessarily. I don't have notifications on for anything, but I'll look at Twitter in the lurking way. I uh,
mm,
I go through phases where I like delete one of them and don't look for a while, or then you know what I mean? But I look at that. Like I don't. I feel like I have a busybody brain. Like I go with that. But something about texting and getting into that conversation that'll take me away from writing and being in
yeah.
that, like, it's really a communication thing, like the minute I start communicating, it's like, oh, what about you?
Um, I mean, so me, the theory and the reality, as with so many things, is a little bit different. So, I mean, I think that ideally it would be best for somebody to just go into writing to not check any of these notifications, because these are the times where you could be distracted, and so it could kind of ruin your morning. But I do feel like after sleep, it is kind of a reset, and a lot of the anxieties or the worries that you had the night before temporarily disappear. So I certainly would advocate for people not to check into that kind of thing. um,
Yeah.
in terms of my reality, so I've implemented some practices to make it better. So I do not have any notifications on my phone. Also, anything like social media and messaging apps, whilst they're on my phone, I have to go through several pages to get to it. So I'm trying to make it harder for myself.
Yep. And then I know you could just pull down the screen and start to write it, but I try to unknow that. Because,
Yeah,
yeah, if it's a
yeah,
little bit out of sight. And yeah, I think notifications are the sickest thing in the world. Because I just think
yeah.
it's like, remember when, was it Friendster or was it on Facebook when it was poking? I feel like, yeah,
Oh,
it's
that
just
was obnoxious.
literal.
Yeah.
Yeah. So weird. That was so weird to me. Like pervy, weird, like just weird all around. Like, you know, like something, I
Like,
guess even the physical, wouldn't walk up to someone in public and like poke them.
well, I don't like being told what to do. So if
No,
somebody pokes me, then I'm actually more likely to never respond to your message. It's going to have the opposite effect because it's like, what the hell are you doing? Um, could go on a semi rant. This has like kind of opened up an area, but one thing I
this
particularly
is making
hate.
it too easy. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Dun, dun, dun.
Yeah, so what
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 do you
I
hate?
hate is I hate red receipts, you know, telling someone that message has been read, because if I have had the time to read it, it does not mean I have had the time to respond. Also, you
Exactly.
know,
That is
as
encouraging
someone,
it's
yeah,
meddling, it's encouraging narcissism, it's giving part of the story, not the whole story, because you're so right. For all you know, you opened it, you didn't, number
mm,
one, something in your life happened, but I feel like
mm,
it's that boundary thing that like it is just none of your business. It's just
yeah,
like in a normal, everyone has the right to respond when they feel like it without giving an excuse either. And that's
yeah,
where like I feel like it's all so messed up and those are sick. Whoever invented that I always is like a sicko. Like
yeah, yeah. And it's interesting too, getting emails and people apologize about how long it's taken them to reply. And it's like, it's okay. Your job is not professional emailer. And, throughout life, I try to remember to keep myself grounded, that nobody really owes me a damn thing. So it's like,
yep.
also, if I send you an email, that doesn't mean that I have a right for a reply. I think a lot of people
Yes.
feel that they do, but it's like,
I know.
and mm,
They do, and I always remind myself, I'm like, well, when I write to someone and I hear back, I don't think that they're not responding right away. It's about me. I don't get mad.
yeah,
I think naturally that like, oh, they have their life. Like everyone has their life. And you're not the
yeah,
center of their life. And that email isn't like the thing of their day. And I feel like
yeah,
it's sad that technologies kind of teach us the opposite because
right,
of things like those receipts and the way everything is dated. So it just and time stamped, like you can know, like you can be too aware of when you did things and you give people a way
mm,
to count. And it's just, then you're counting.
yeah, yeah, yeah. But to go back to answering your question from now about 10 minutes ago, because I will remember what I remember what
Yeah,
people ask me,
you're
even if
that.
I completely deviate. But in terms of whether I do check things before writing, so not only have I moved the apps over to like the kind of final screen, but I've got two main email addresses. One of them is way more likely for me to get emails that irritate me. So I typically have it so that, if first of all, if I click into emails, the default will be the one that does not irritate me. So
Yes.
I might I might check that one, but then not check the other.
I love,
It kind of
do the
really
people who
depends
are,
what
do the people
what
who
was
have the do the people who have the irritating email address know that they're irritating, do you think?
I mean,
Like what
well,
people met
first of all,
their
no,
email?
no, no is the answer. They don't know that. And like,
Yay.
it's not that I'm exclusive. It's not this is only exclusively for people who irritate me. But like it just I know that like if there's something that's going to like potentially cause stress or anxiety, it's like typically dealt with on that email. But I mean I got rid of Facebook a few years ago because it wasn't really adding a lot to my life. And I also felt from because I guess with social media, you've got two things. You've got one to actually connect with people and like a kind of friendship and a social element. And then second, you do have the kind of marketing and the professional. And I just felt that like it wasn't bringing me a lot of joy. And I wasn't really convinced that Facebook was like a great marketing tool or like it wasn't delivering the best bang for my buck, as it were. Um,
Hmm.
I I mean, Twitter is the main one that I'm using in terms of that. Uh, you know, we have an Instagram account, we have a TikTok account now, which TikTok is an interesting one. It it is
It
probably the fast. What was that? Sorry.
makes me feel crazy, TikTok. Like, it's
Oh
almost
yeah.
everything I hate combined together. Like, if someone sends me one thing to watch, I'll watch it, and,
Mm,
like, those can be great, but the way it just feeds it just keeps going and going is, like, my
mm,
nightmare, and you don't
yeah.
have time to reflect. It just here, here, here. It's like,
Yeah.
I don't look at stories on Instagram, really, it just I guess I like so much, like, to pause and think about things, and I'm a slow processor, and the one time I went on TikTok, it was like, for whatever how the way it thinks it knows you, they all think they know you. It's giving me all
Yeah.
of the I don't really it's giving me all these recipes and then these life hacks, and I'm just sitting there like, I do this wrong, I do that wrong, I didn't know that, I didn't know that. I'm like, people like this? Like, they like
Yeah.
it? Like,
Yeah.
so do you
I
like go
mean,
on there, or do you like make stuff and put it on, or do you like, let it roll?
so here's the thing with TikTok. I mean, as a consumer, I'm not interested. It's like I have no interest in it as like a consumer and as a user. If I want video content, then I'm going to go to something like YouTube. Like normally, that there's something that I want that is more considered. There's not a 1 or 2 minute soundbite that is going to make me really happy that I consumed that. It doesn't add
No,
anything to my life. So like, for similar entertainment, it's like YouTube or it is podcasts. I want the context. And because I mean that is a problem, another separate rant, with some things today that we've got things taken out of context, and context does matter. Context is important, and so
I
that
know,
is
so much,
yeah,
everything, and the appreciation of that, like, it's what I feel like is getting lost, that, like, it's also just more interesting and better, like, brain food when there's context, and
yeah,
when, like, you watch something in full and, like, get to put all the pieces together, and, yeah, also, I'm like, my brain just wants I like when something is, like, a long time, and I'm gonna just sit back and take it all in, and then I'll get to, like, some part that'll be like "Oh, wow," but I like the
yeah,
build up to that. It's
yeah,
almost like music when a song has a long introduction, an instrumental, and then
yeah.
the singing coming, like, I like slow and long,
Mm,
yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Born at
So
the wrong time, yes.
yeah. Yeah, so as a consumer not interested, as a content creator, I'm aware that this is the fastest growing social media platform. I'm aware that particularly from a younger demographic, it is completely, that it is the most popular one. So if I want my writing or my podcast or whatever I'm creating to be available to younger people and to grow that audience, then TikTok is a good kind of medium to tap into. But I'm very much concerned with authenticity, and I'm I'm not like a kind of typical TikToker or whatever you call them, and like I'm not a stereotypical YouTuber either. Like I just think it's too artificial, it's too phony. I'm not gonna put on some weird voice and be like, yo, what's up, we got Caroline Kepnes here, we got the new you book, it is popping. No, fuck that, that's not me. I'm just
Yes.
just a
I think
slightly
that's the biggest thing
cynical
about all of it. We
British
all,
guy with
yeah,
yeah,
yeah. Well, I feel like we're all really wired for that more than ever now to know what's authentic because
yeah,
of the yeah, because when there's so much that isn't, it's like, wow, it's like I feel like we have a sense of that, you know? Like if I heard
yeah.
you saying that, I would be laughing, you know, like,
Yeah,
I would know that
exactly, because it's bullshit. But I
and
mean, the way that I have utilized TikTok is like I will put like a little clip from the podcast up on TikTok, and then after there's like a kind of call for action. If you enjoyed this, then this is the episode, and that's the way that I'm utilizing it. I've tried to like, oh, can I do a little video of me? Like, I got Eric LaRocca's book the other day. It was really good. Can I just like hold it up and be? But it isn't me, Caroline.
oh my
It's like what?
god, yeah, I'm like mine. If my phone ever got hacked, that would be my biggest fear. And I hope that they're all deleted. But I'm like, why? I can't do this. Like, and I can
Yeah,
genuinely love something, but if the minute I'm on camera talking about it, it's just looks. And I don't think it's just to me. You know what I mean? Like
yeah,
when you look at yourself, like of course you're looking at yourself. There's that aspect, but some people are just good at that. Some people have it
yeah.
in their DNA, and there's a comfort zone. People like you and me, like no.
Yeah, yeah. Also, like, because I can sometimes deliver things like quite monotone. It's like if I'm like, "Oh, I really love this book by Eric LaRocca," it's like, is he being sarcastic? And then do you actually? No, it's like, I really liked it. Are you
Also,
sure?
with me, it's the reverse thing. I feel like when I'm telling the truth, I sound like I'm lying. Like it's like the
Yeah,
opposite of in real life. I'm like, what happens? And I try and forget the camera's there. It's like I don't like being on camera. I don't like having my picture taken. It's just any of it. And I feel like a camera and me
yeah,
are just a, a weird thing. Like to me, it's an intrusion. It's like
yeah.
it activates something in my brain that's aware it's being recorded. Like all of it, you know.
Yeah, and it's like,
So
I'm okay with this because it's like, this is just two people talking. We're not trying to put on a show or entertain, but yeah, it's the moment where the camera becomes a thing. So it's like, honestly, if I was trying to promote a book, the better thing to do would be to get like a guest and to just talk to them about why it's good, and then we might put a clip of that on.
yes, a clip. And like I love the way things come full circle and then are just totally obviously old. It's like that's what we know is also a commercial.
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
I still love watching old school television because I love commercials. I love to see
yeah.
them change over the years. I love the approaches changing. I love everything about commercials. They fascinate me. I like to see the tech stuff. I like the psychology of it, of how they're trying to get to you, what game they're playing. And it's funny to me to see like everyone be like, I hate commercials, and then go on TikTok, which is like it's a lot of commercials. Like even when
Yeah,
it's not, it's like there's no real way to be alive and avoid commercials because people sell things and people
yeah,
want you to know about them. So, yeah, because the way people act sometimes when I say that about TV, I'm like, I also like in that way those breaks of like the way if you go to watch a play, there's an intermission and you kind of walk
yeah,
away and dwell in the light and like the way when you're watching a show on TV, there's that commercial break and whether it's a drama or a comedy, there's something about having that little break for your brain to like
mm,
process and anticipate. And I like that. And I'll never not like that. So yeah,
yeah,
I don't even have
yeah.
VR. Yeah.
Right, right. But I mean, going back to you, you created all these writers that have their own books that, of course, are fictional books because they don't exist within this reality. Would you ever consider writing any of these? Would you consider actually writing Scabies for Breakfast, which is a fucking amazing title?
Absolutely, yes, because that's like I was living vicariously through each of them in that way, in what they were
Mm,
writing, and what like it's part of that like morbidity of like feeling like I was in such a aware of death state of mind and aware of all the books I would never write, and this was a way to get them out. I feel like at some point I
mm,
asked my publisher to make covers for all of them, like because that's
yeah.
my I'm like at least I want to pretend and I want to see their names. Like I love them, I'm happy
Mm,
for them. I want to see their books and the covers and the way they, Sarah Best would look different from Glenn from Scabies, and I want to see Flower Girls, like especially at,
yeah.
like I'm doing it at Trident Books where Joe goes with Wonder and where they get Flower Girls, and I'm
Mm,
doing an event there, and I'm like I want to walk in there and I want Flower Girls to be on the shelf. But yes, I would absolutely. I'm thinking about writing all of them, and at different points when you were talking before about things you've started, I've like
yeah.
written a few pages of a lot of them to get into their voice and their head a little bit and never finished them. But I feel like one day I'm gonna roll that dice and like see which one grabs me. And yeah,
Yeah, yeah. I
yes,
mean, I think scabies would be amazing too because, again, really, really difficult to talk about this without spoilers. I'm gonna see can I phrase this in such a way that I can even keep it in this episode? But I mean, Joe's Joe's reaction to the composition of this book is like his mind is blown. But if this book was actually written by Caroline Kepnes, now we've just thrown another level to what was already, a pretty
yes,
meta thing to begin with.
yes, and I love that title too. And that was part of the like
Yeah.
I feel like I can think of titles for random books and for other people's books, but my books is just like a since that first one was so like you, it was so simple and so like every you book I
Mm,
always feel like it's all you, so it's kind of a like struggle. But yeah, and Scabies for Breakfast was that like to me like a little Vonnegut kind of thing. That was the
yeah.
style and the universe. And I feel like since it's so not what I write, I love the idea, but I love to read that. And I would love like,
Yeah.
oh, that we could have a different lives. And the same way like Wonder's writing a book that's like a Pat Conroy, like sweeping years, like, epic of a family. And it's again the opposite of what I write. But don't you have that urge to like do what you don't do or what like the way that things
Yeah.
work out that you know what I mean? Like and lose Arby's Noir. I'm like, like I would like to go do all of these things.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
movies especially. Yeah, I remember because I got word like when that phrase just came to me, and then I got that nighttime pretentious feeling of like you didn't even know what scabies is, and like, and then I started to read about it a lot, and Jesus, like
Yeah.
it's yeah, not good.
Yeah. Not good.
Flash
Is
scabies
the
is yeah,
understatement.
yes, yes.
Now, I wonder, obviously, with there being a reasonable amount of deaths in any given Joe Goldberg book, and like a lot of traps and luring people into different situations, I'm wondering how much of this comes from your imagination, how much is kind of based on research or just quirky things that you read about.
It's my paranoia. Like it's just like I feel again it goes back to that little kid part of me that like just always imagining the worst thing, always thinking the
Mm,
worst, always expecting like the other shoe to drop, and also always this element of like why the way people we don't know when we're in that dangerous situation because it feels good. Like with
mm.
a character kidnapped, like when you're relaxing and being yourself and being open with someone and that backfires, I'm like, what could be worse? because it's the
Yeah.
opposite of the monster. Like, I love all the different kinds of monsters, right? But like, there's that monster that like you see the shadow, you know exactly what it is that it's coming, and I definitely have a lot of nightmares like that. But to me, whenever I like am in an Uber and I'm getting on with the driver, and then there's that moment, like it'll maybe just like a 20-second silence when I'm like, this could be it. This,
Yeah.
it happened all the time, and like maybe there's something floating through this air that's gonna knock me out right now. Like, so yeah, and it's just the way my brain works. But then
Yeah.
when you write
Does
things
that
like this, people tell you more and more stories, right? Like when you write about dark things, then
yeah.
people tell you their dark stories, the stories about their friends, like, and it just definitely like feeds itself, right?
Yeah. I mean, the amount of kind of messed up things that we hear about happening, I sometimes get these moments where, yeah, any given time, it's a miracle that I'm still alive. It's like the amount of times
Yeah.
something could have gone wrong.
Oh yeah, and that is where Uber like fascinates me. Like I once
Yeah.
got in a car with a driver who I knew something was wrong, and she a few minutes
Mm.
into it told me that like, she just had the last of her meth and she was like freaking out. Now, two things. I am obsessed with meth for years. Like I wrote this short story about meth. I wrote so much about meth years ago. Methland is one of my favorite books of all time. So beautifully written. And so obviously when Breaking Bad came out, I was like, "Oh, it was nice of
Yeah.
them to make this for me." Like I just everything about it fascinates. And I'm sitting there like, "Oh my god, I'm in the car like she's on meth and she doesn't have any more and she's calling her dealer like, of course this is how I die. Like of course, of course, of
Yeah.
course." And I didn't. And I was not disappointed, and like nothing, we didn't crash. You know what I mean? Like nothing, I got to my
Mm.
destination, it was fine, and I was almost like, "Man, like, weird." Like it was all
Yeah.
there for like a big terrible thing for her to keep driving and be like, "That's it. We got to go to my dealer right now." But
Yeah.
yeah,
How were you when you got out of the car? Did you just get out very quickly and go, or were you like, really hope you get that meth? Did you say
yeah, I
anything?
like delayed reaction. She was very apologetic and nice. I'm like, "No," and she's like,
Yeah.
"Oh, you were nice. I just felt like I could tell you." I have that problem too that I feel like a lot of writers have, where just something about you, people just start telling you things, and
It
like,
happens so much.
yes, like, and I love it, but I feel like when it happens, I'm always like, "Oh, that's right." Like there's just something about us when you're a writer that
Mm.
like people tell you their story. And
Yeah.
yeah, so then that way I get like I felt for her, like she had a lot of things going on. Then I got out of that car and had that delayed reaction of like, "Oh my God." Like that was yeah.
And do you find any time you get an Uber, do you text like at least somebody just to make them aware, like getting an Uber now? I mean, you don't have to do it in such an obvious way, but just like you send someone a text to be aware of where you are in case something happens.
Do you still do that? Like in the beginning, I did, and definitely after there was so long without Ubering, I've noticed that like since it's come back into life, I am more casual about it. Very like I don't have that impulse to do that. I feel very like this
Mm,
is it, this is it. If I'm gonna die, I'm gonna die. Like there's just
yeah,
like to me that's a weird like post pandemic thing that I'm like maybe I'll go back to like being doing exactly what you just said, but maybe not.
yeah.
But there was one Uber where I got in and the girl was listening to the Hidden Bodies audiobook and I was like, that was the best Uber ever. Yeah.
Wh- when she was listening to it, did did you say anything, or like, I mean,
Yeah.
or did you
I was
just
like,
not?
oh my God. Like
Yeah.
I wrote, it was just so like, and she freaked out and yeah, it was a very, very, very neat moment.
Yeah. The narrator for the audiobooks is so perfect, so on
Isn't
point.
Yeah, I that's where like I when I read it, like I just read it on a podcast with Clay McLeod Chapman and Gabino
Oh, yeah.
Iglesias, and I'm reading, and I have a hard time. Like I can read other things I've always loved to read, but when I'm reading
Mm,
those books and I know how he does it, and I'm like I'm not doing it right. Like he's like so talented. Like he can do the other voices without sounding like he's doing a voice. kind of like when you
Mm.
did your voice. I've got
Yeah.
Caroline Kepnes. Like, and I hear myself, and like I get worse and worse at it. So I just go faster and
Yeah.
faster because I'm like, yeah, he does a very excellent job. And yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, I'm so glad that you've retained him for the entire series. I mean, I can't imagine the audiobooks without him. And
absolutely.
actually, so I love his versions of your books so much that I got an advance copy of the latest one and I read it, but then yesterday it was the UK release date. I have an
Yes,
Audible UK account and I wonder if I can download this. So now I've now listened to about half of it again. So it was a heavy listening day yesterday. And like
yes. Oh, I love
as always.
it. Also, like, it's one of my favorite scenes in a movie is when in Casino, when James
Mm,
Woods is talking to Sharon Stone on her
mm,
wedding day, and with that, like, I see your deal, like that. It was like I always feel like, oh, that's one of those early things that started Joe before I knew it. You know what I mean? Of that
right.
tone. When I heard Santino, I was like, he's doing that thing. Like, he's got that ability to like
Yeah.
nursery rhyme it up, like dark, very like he's speaking to you. That's where I feel like it's just a
Yeah.
distinctive talent, and yeah, and it's a bonus
Yeah.
that he's not woods.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like, to have even written a book that has like quite a bit of it in the second person. I mean, it's almost like with the U series, you have broken so many rules that they're like, oh, don't do this. It's like that, that the second person is not, there's not an easy way to go about it. And also, we have show, don't tell, but the nature of a lot of Joe is that he's gonna tell you. But as I
Yep.
said, like you pull it off completely. But were there a lot of fears going into that? Was there pushback even from editors and agents and publishers? When you first presented it to them.
I mean, that was part of my like, okay, I'm going to do what comes naturally because when I've tried to follow those rules, I'm not myself. It's kind of like, too, with the pop
Mm,
culture references. Like, when I was a younger writer, I was very like, there was a certain way to be a writer. You know what I mean? And
mm,
like, I was like,
yeah.
not like I'm dating it, blah, blah, blah. And it was
Mm,
like, after at that point in my life, I'm like, fuck it. Like, I'm gonna do what I want to
yeah.
do. And I guess I like things too where I thought when I'm doing a short story, I'd written a lot in the second person. And I like when you can't decide if you love something or hate it. When there's that little
Mm,
space where you're like trying to like it's annoying, but you're still going with it. I love that feeling. And I thought that
mm,
if I could get in there and have people almost annoyed at thinking that
mm,
they should hate it, that would only contribute to the like, why do I keep reading this fucking thing? Like, and
yeah.
yeah, the publisher that got it, like, absolutely got it and did not like have any, understood that what I was doing. The rejections were like, we don't know what this is, how to market it. And yeah, and I feel like that thing of we don't know what this is, I was also like, of course, no, no one likes being rejected, but I always like learning the reasons that you're rejected and how you can always learn from them or kind of understand what you did a little bit more. And to this day, I'm like, yeah, I don't know what it is, like where it belongs, because they're so reflective of my mood or what I'm like. There are
Mm,
days when I feel like I'm aware of the thrills. There are days when I'm jacked up on horror. There are days when I watch Terms of Endearment and I'm a sap. You know what I mean? Like, and I'm like, yeah, I don't know what I know. He kills people. Like, I know that. So
yeah.
that's the bottom line. Makes it a certain thing, but yeah, I absolutely liked the risk. Like the risk is where I feel like it kept me in it. Like it made it exciting to me to keep going. Of like that, this might be the most annoying thing ever, you know, that I've
Yeah.
ever done.
Yeah. I've just become aware of the time, so I think you need to go soon, right? I've just looked. Isn't it
Oh yeah.
kind of like
Oh my god.
7:30
Oh, that's
for
weird.
you?
Yeah, 7:30. I so just I had no idea.
Yeah, like Yeah, so I'm wondering, I mean, yeah, so you probably need to go in a minute, and by a minute I mean probably 10 minutes ago for your dinner with your
Also,
friend, but
I'm just gonna check the.
yeah.
Oh yeah, I got a little time. Yes,
Yeah.
but if you need to,
Yeah.
like you're in the middle.
Well,
Yeah, it is
I
funny.
I don't need to go, but so I'm thinking now obviously I'll cut this weird bit out where we're just talking about what we're going to do.
Who
But
wants to hear this?
it if you're up for it, we'll talk kind of briefly about the TV show, like as much as you can. Um,
Yep.
and if you would like, I mean, this has been a hell of a lot of fun, and I've got a lot more that I'd love to talk to you about. So if you want, we could schedule another podcast. We could talk at length. We could talk at length
I
about
don't want to rush it.
Providence,
You know what I
which, well,
Yeah.
say that again. There's a
I don't
slight
wanna
delay.
Oh, I said I don't wanna rush it, so let's do that. I would love yes, then we can talk about this show and Providence. Yes, I love that plan.
Yeah, we'll talk about the show. We'll talk about Providence, and we'll also talk about the Attentionist. In the Dark Stars
Yes.
anthology. Like
Yes.
John Taff
Long
will
last.
listen and he'll be like, "Hang on, didn't you originally get Caroline on to because of the Dark Stars thing? You fuckers have just talked about you and social media for 2.5 hours." But yeah,
Yes, so we will
like,
do that.
yeah, and I can tell you, I can tell you already that I know that if you so choose to, that like even with those topics alone, we can fill another hour, if not 2 hours. There's so
No, I
much,
know. Yeah,
yeah, there's so
yeah.
much to
We'll have a
say,
chock
and
block. Yeah.
yeah, and I feel that Providence doesn't it doesn't get the coverage, or people don't talk to you about it as much as they should, and like I just wonder, it's probably because of like I guess the TV show shot you to so much attention that people aren't talking
Yes,
about the other stuff, but it's like,
I know.
you know
And then there's 4 of the U's. Do you know what I mean? And then there's 1 Providence. I love that book. I
yeah,
love that experience. I can't wait to write different things. And I always like it's that's why I'm like, I'm so excited when people find it and when people connect with it. And yeah, and I do feel bad that when it's not, when there's so much you and I'm like, Providence too.
yeah, yeah. So we'll talk about Providence and the Attentionist. I'd also like to delve into more of your short stories. So, I mean, if you like an email or via Twitter, if you have like some specific recommendations, then I will read a lot of your short fiction as well.
Oh,
Um,
absolutely. Yes. I will send you some
so
links.
yeah, yeah, that would be
Yeah.
fantastic.
Like
So
we'll see the
I'll
websites are still in existence. Yes.
yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, if not, then like PDFs or Word documents. I mean, what Word documents are almost better because I can just compile that into like some sort of EPUB that I'll put on my Kindle. Um,
Oh, good. Okay, so I'll do that. So it's okay if they're in separate documents? Like you
yeah,
can
yeah,
send
because
Word.
I'll just compile the stuff myself. Obviously, she'll go without saying that that is for me. I'm not like bootlegging some weird Caroline Kepnes collection.
You can
you
chapbook.
you'll
Hell,
know
why
who,
not?
yeah, you'll know who's done it if you're like, hang on the dark web. There's this weird collection that I never wrote. That like the stories are in a weird order. Um,
I love that.
Michael David Wilson has wrote a forward to it as well. It's like it's not for
That.
profit. It's just completely being a deviant, just putting.
It's for the
And
dark web.
anyway,
Yeah.
I'll
Good. Well,
wrap
I'll do
this.
that. I'll
Yeah,
put those
I'll
together.
wrap this.
Oh, sorry. I'll shut up.
Yeah, there's this like 3-second delay. And so we keep
Oh, yeah.
going to talk. We're both so infused.
Yes.
Well, Caroline, thank you so much for talking to me this evening. For you, this has been fascinating, and we will get you back on the show soon to talk about Providence and to talk about your short stories and to talk a little bit about the TV adaptation of you. But before then, where can our listeners connect with you?
Oh, let's see. I am on Twitter. I'm on Instagram, and I still have the Facebook page. I have like the author page, and then there's a thing called Caroline's Cage where people gather and discuss all kinds of things. And I feel like those, yeah. I have a TikTok account, but I'm not on there. So,
Yeah,
but I,
yeah.
yeah, yes, my places and my
You
name
know,
everywhere.
it's probably for the best. And, to finish my TikTok thought, I have found that, like, the length of time it takes for me to, like, create a TikTok video, even to take a clip from the podcast, I'm not
I,
convinced that, like, it's worth it, but I'm experimenting, I'm putting clips out. The
yes.
verdict is not out yet on whether I think
Do
TikTok
you
is
have to
something
also
that
do the voiceover or writing on the screen to like say what it is? Do you have to,
um
it seems like a lot of work. I guess if
so,
it
like,
becomes, if you know how to do it, it's probably, yeah.
yeah, I mean, originally I was putting audio up, but it just doesn't translate very well, on a video platform. And then I was like, well, I'll just put like a video clip. But even that, it's like, I then have some This Is Horror music after, and there's like a screen with a call to action. So it's a little bit fiddly. And that is before we even consider the fact that it's like, well, I got to find 1 or 2 minutes of this conversation that I feel just out of context is giving people some value or something.
Right.
And some episodes there isn't, because it's like that there's no way that I can just give you 1 or 2 minutes and possibly do this justice. And as we said before, I'm not about taking people out of context. It's like, to get this in context, we'd need 20 minutes. And I don't think that the TikTok
Right.
audience is going to stick
I mean,
around.
it's such a specific way for you to listen to it, to be searching for that little bite. That's
Yeah.
like, I feel like that's an exhausting way to listen to something, to be like searching for the snippet.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's,
yeah. I
yeah.
mean, the idea is that hopefully it's like a trailer. They hear that minute and they're like, "Oh, gotta listen to the 59 other minutes." Well, do you have any final thoughts to leave our listeners with?
I think I just loved this conversation with you. Like it's overdue. I like the scope of it, like the way we've talked about so many different areas of life, like from
Yeah,
childhood, social media, like just going around, and I don't know. I like when it feels like there's, in a small amount of time, there's so much. Like,
yeah,
yes.
yeah, yeah. No,
I think you
it's
are
been
quite good at it.
fantastic. I'm looking forward to doing it again.
Me too. Yes.